Avoidants don't typically manipulate through overt aggression or calculated schemes. Their manipulation is subtler, often unconscious, embedded in questions that seem reasonable on the surface, but serve to deflect accountability, shift blame, and keep you questioning your own perceptions and needs. These questions aren't asked once and forgotten. They become recurring tools that the avoidant uses whenever their patterns are challenged, whenever you express legitimate hurt, whenever you establish boundaries that threaten their comfort. The power of these questions lies in how they make you doubt yourself, make you feel like you're the problem, make you shrink your needs to accommodate their limitations. Each question carries an implicit message that your feelings are excessive, your expectations are unreasonable, your needs are too much. Over time, these questions erode your confidence in your own reality, your trust in your own perceptions, your willingness to advocate for what you need from partnership. Understanding these questions and the manipulation they serve helps you recognize when you're being gaslit, when your legitimate concerns are being deflected, when the avoidant is using your own empathy and self-doubt against you. The questions feel like invitations to dialogue, like the avoidant trying to understand your perspective, but they're actually defensive maneuvers designed to avoid taking responsibility, to maintain the status quo, to ensure you continue accommodating their patterns while questioning whether your own needs are valid. Why are you so sensitive? The question that makes you doubt your reality. This question arrives whenever you express hurt about the avoidant's behavior, whenever you name the impact of their withdrawal or inconsistency, whenever you communicate that their patterns are causing you pain. The avoidant responds not by acknowledging your feelings or examining their behavior, but by questioning your sensitivity, by suggesting that your emotional response is the problem, rather than their actions that triggered it. This question is manipulation disguised as inquiry, because it shifts focus from what the avoidant did to how you reacted, from their behavior to your sensitivity, from their patterns to your emotional regulation. The manipulation works because it contains a grain of truth that makes you doubt yourself. Maybe you are sensitive. Maybe you do feel things intensely. Maybe your emotional responses are bigger than some people's. This acknowledgement of your sensitivity makes the avoidance question seem valid, makes you wonder if you're overreacting, makes you question whether your hurt is justified. But sensitivity isn't the problem. The problem is behavior that causes hurt, and your sensitivity doesn't make that behavior acceptable. In fact, if you're in a relationship with someone, your sensitivity should inform them about what hurts you, so they can avoid causing that hurt. Instead, the avoidant uses your sensitivity as evidence that you're the problem. The question also implies that there's a normal or acceptable level of sensitivity, and you've exceeded it. This implication makes you feel defective, like there's something wrong with how you experience emotion, like you need to fix yourself rather than the avoidant needing to address their behavior. You start monitoring your reactions, suppressing your feelings, questioning whether you should express hurt or simply manage it internally. This self-monitoring is exactly what the avoidant wants, because it means you stop holding them accountable for their patterns. If you're too sensitive, then their withdrawal isn't the issue. Your reaction to it is. The manipulation deepens when the avoidant compares you to others, suggesting that previous partners didn't have these problems, that other people wouldn't react this way, that your sensitivity is unique and problematic. These comparisons make you feel like you're failing at relationship, like you're demanding too much, like you're the common denominator in the dysfunction. But what the avoidant doesn't mention is that their previous partners either also expressed hurt that was dismissed as oversensitivity, or they suppressed their feelings entirely and eventually left when the suppression became unsustainable. Your sensitivity isn't the problem. The pattern is. The question also serves to derail conversations about the avoidance behavior. Instead of discussing why they disappeared for a week without communication, you're now defending your emotional response, explaining why you were hurt, justifying your feelings. The avoidant has successfully shifted the conversation from accountability for their actions to judgment of your reactions. This derailment ensures that the original issue never gets addressed, that the avoidant never has to examine their behavior or commit to changing it. They've made the conversation about fixing you rather than about them showing up differently. The too sensitive question creates a dynamic where you become increasingly afraid to express hurt or disappointment because you anticipate being told you're overreacting. This fear silences you, makes you accept behavior that violates your needs, makes you minimize your own pain to avoid being accused of sensitivity. The avoidant benefits from your silence because it allows them to continue their patterns without facing your emotional responses to those patterns. Your sensitivity, which should be information they receive about how to treat you well, becomes a weapon they use to dismiss your legitimate concerns and avoid accountability for causing you pain. Don't you trust me? The question that weaponizes your insecurity. This question emerges when you express concern about the avoidant's behavior, when you ask for reassurance about their feelings or intentions, when you notice patterns that create insecurity and you dare to name them. Instead of addressing your concerns directly, the avoidant responds by questioning your trust, by framing your need for reassurance as evidence of a trust problem that exists in you rather than as a reasonable response to their inconsistent behavior. This manipulation is particularly insidious because it takes your legitimate reaction to their unreliability and reframes it as your personal failing. The question works as manipulation because trust is foundational to relationships, and being accused of lacking it makes you feel like you're the one damaging the relationship. You don't want to be someone who doesn't trust their partner. You want to be secure, confident, unbothered by normal relationship fluctuations. So when the avoidant asks, "Don't you trust me?" you immediately start questioning yourself. Maybe you're too paranoid. Maybe you are projecting past hurts onto current situations. Maybe your insecurity is the real problem, not their behavior. This self-doubt is exactly what the avoidant cultivates because it prevents you from holding them accountable. The manipulation deepens because the avoidant ignores that trust is earned through consistent behavior, not demanded through accusations of its absence. If you're feeling insecure, if you're questioning their commitment, if you're uncertain about their feelings, these responses are typically reactions to mixed signals, inconsistent presence, or patterns that suggest they're not fully invested. The appropriate response would be for the avoidant to examine whether their behavior is trustworthy, to recognize that your insecurity is feedback about their inconsistency, to commit to showing up more reliably so that trust can develop. Instead, they flip the script, making your lack of trust the issue rather than their untrustworthy behavior. The question also creates a bind, where you're damned either way. If you admit you don't fully trust them, you've confirmed that you're the problem, that you're bringing insecurity and suspicion into the relationship. But if you insist you do trust them, you've now committed to not expressing concerns or asking for reassurance, because doing so would contradict your claim of trust. The avoidant has effectively silenced any future expressions of insecurity by making those expressions evidence that you don't trust them, and lack of trust has been established as a fundamental relationship problem that's your responsibility to fix. The manipulation works by the avoidant conflating different types of trust. There's trust that your partner is faithful, trust that they care about you, and trust that they'll show up consistently and reliably. You might trust the avoidant in the first two ways while having legitimate concerns about the third. But when the avoidant asks, "Don't you trust me?" they're treating trust as monolithic, as though questioning their consistency means you think they're lying or cheating. This conflation allows them to dismiss your specific concerns about their patterns by acting wounded, that you would doubt them at all. The question also weaponizes your attachment insecurity against you. If you have anxious attachment patterns, if you have wounds from past relationships where trust was broken, the avoidance question triggers those vulnerabilities. You start wondering if your insecurity is a pattern you bring to all relationships, if you're sabotaging something good because of your own issues, if you need to work on yourself rather than expecting the avoidant to change their behavior. This introspection is healthy to a point, but the avoidant manipulates it, using your self-awareness against you to avoid examining their own contribution to your insecurity. The trust question ultimately serves to make the avoidance inconsistency your problem to manage rather than their pattern to address. Your insecurity becomes evidence of your issues rather than a reasonable response to their unreliability. You're positioned as someone who needs to develop more trust, while the avoidant faces no expectation to become more trustworthy. This dynamic ensures the avoidant can continue their patterns while you work on trusting them, despite their behavior giving you every reason not to. Why can't you just give me space? The question that frames their avoidance as your problem. This question appears when you express hurt about the avoidance withdrawal, when you ask for more presence or consistency, when you communicate that their distance is creating problems in the relationship. The avoidant responds not by acknowledging the impact of their withdrawal, but by framing their need for space as reasonable and your difficulty with it as your failure to respect boundaries. This manipulation reframes the avoidance pattern of emotional unavailability as a legitimate boundary that you're violating rather than as an attachment wound that's damaging the relationship. The manipulation works because space is a reasonable need in relationships. Everyone needs some degree of autonomy, some time alone, some breathing room within partnership. By framing their withdrawal as a need for space, the avoidant makes it seem like you're being controlling or clingy by having a problem with it. You don't want to be the partner who can't give space, who demands constant attention, who suffocates their partner with neediness. So you question yourself. Maybe you are being too demanding. Maybe you do need to back off. Maybe you're the one with the problem for not being comfortable with their need for independence. But the manipulation lies in equating the avoidance pattern of withdrawal with normal, healthy needs for space. The issue isn't that they occasionally need alone time or that they value some independence. The issue is that they use space as a justification for disappearing without communication, for going days or weeks with minimal contact, for withdrawing emotionally whenever intimacy deepens, for creating distance that leaves you perpetually uncertain about the relationship's status. This isn't healthy space. It's avoidant withdrawal disguised as boundary setting, and your discomfort with it isn't about being unable to respect boundaries. It's about recognizing that what they're calling space is actually absence. The question also implies that you're not giving them space, that you're pursuing them excessively, that you're violating their boundaries. This implication makes you examine your behavior, questioning whether you're reaching out too much, whether your expectations are unreasonable, whether you're being clingy. You start pulling back, giving them the space they claim to need, but you find that no amount of space is ever enough. They still withdraw. They still create distance. Because the issue isn't actually about space. It's about their discomfort with intimacy, their fear of vulnerability, their attachment wounds that make closeness feel threatening. But by framing it as a space issue, they've made it about your failure to give them something rather than about their inability to sustain connection. The manipulation deepens when the avoidant acts as though asking for space is the same as giving you advance notice about their withdrawal. They might say, "I told you I need space," as though this announcement means you should accept days of silence without concern, weeks of emotional unavailability without hurt. but stating that you need space doesn't give you license to disappear without any consideration for your partner's needs. Healthy space involves communication about when you'll reconnect, reassurance that the space isn't about the relationship ending, acknowledgement that your need for space affects your partner, and appreciation for their accommodation of it. The avoidance version of space includes none of this communication or consideration. It's simply withdrawal that you're expected to accept without complaint. The question also prevents discussion about what reasonable space actually looks like in the relationship. Instead of having a conversation about balancing both people's needs, your need for consistency and connection with their need for autonomy and alone time, the avoidant has made it a binary. Either you give them the space they demand, or you're not respecting their boundaries. This framing eliminates negotiation, eliminates compromise, eliminates the possibility of finding a middle ground where both people's needs are honored. The avoidance need for space becomes absolute and non-negotiable, while your need for presence becomes demanding and unreasonable. The space question ultimately serves to make you responsible for accommodating the avoidance withdrawal patterns while they face no responsibility for considering your needs for connection. Your difficulty with their distance becomes your issue to resolve through therapy, through working on your attachment, through becoming more independent. Meanwhile, the avoidant continues their patterns of withdrawal without ever examining whether their need for space is actually a need for healing, whether their comfort with distance reflects secure attachment or defended avoidance, whether their inability to maintain presence while also having autonomy is something they should address rather than something you should simply accept. Isn't this too much, too soon? The question that keeps you perpetually waiting. This question surfaces whenever the relationship begins to deepen, whenever progression toward greater commitment seems natural, whenever you express desires for the relationship to move forward in normal ways. The avoidant responds by suggesting that the pace is too fast, that you're pushing for too much too quickly, that healthy relationships develop more slowly than what you're asking for. This manipulation reframes normal relationship progression as you being demanding or rushing things, and it positions the avoidant as the reasonable one who wants to take things slow and build something sustainable. The manipulation works because pacing is subjective, and too fast is always relative. There's no objective timeline for when people should say, "I love you," when they should meet each other's families, when they should discuss exclusivity or future plans. By suggesting that your desired pace is too fast, the avoidant makes you question whether you're being reasonable, whether you're rushing things, whether your expectations are premature. You don't want to pressure them or scare them away by moving too quickly, so you agree to slow down, to be patient, to wait until they're ready for steps that might already feel overdue to you. But the manipulation lies in the fact that for the avoidant, it's always too soon. 6 months into the relationship, too soon to discuss moving in together. A year in, too soon to talk about long-term commitment. 2 years, too soon to get engaged. The too soon objection isn't actually about timing. It's about the avoidance discomfort with deepening intimacy, with increasing commitment, with progression that would make the relationship feel more permanent and harder to exit. By framing their resistance as about pacing rather than about their attachment wounds, they make it seem like time will resolve their hesitation, like if you're just patient enough, they'll eventually be ready. But readiness doesn't arrive through the passage of time alone. It requires the avoidant to address their fears about commitment, and most avoidants aren't doing that work while they're asking you to wait. The question also implies that there's something wrong with wanting progression, that desiring normal relationship milestones is pressure rather than natural evolution. You start feeling guilty for wanting to meet their family, for hoping to spend holidays together, for wanting to know if you're building toward a future together. These reasonable desires get reframed as you pushing too hard, wanting too much, not respecting their pace. This reframing makes you suppress your own needs and timeline, makes you wait indefinitely for the avoidant to be comfortable with steps that wouldn't feel like major commitments in healthy relationships. The manipulation deepens when the avoidant compares your timeline to some imagined standard of healthy pacing. They might say things like, "Most people don't talk about marriage this early," or "It's too soon to be this serious," or "We should enjoy what we have without rushing toward the future." These statements sound reasonable, but they ignore that relationship timelines vary widely and that there's no universal right pace. What matters is whether both people feel the relationship is progressing in ways that meet their needs, not whether the progression matches some external standard. But by invoking these standards, the avoidant makes you feel like you're abnormal for wanting what you want when you want it. The question also serves to avoid conversations about incompatibility. If you want commitment and progression, while the avoidant wants to keep things casual and undefined, that's an incompatibility that matters. But by framing the issue as about timing, rather than about fundamental differences in what you want from a relationship, the avoidant avoids this conversation. They imply that eventually they'll want what you want, that you just need to be patient. That time will align your desires. This implication keeps you waiting and hoping, rather than recognizing that the avoidant may never want the same level of commitment you're seeking, regardless of how much time passes. The "too much too soon" question ultimately serves to keep you in a perpetual state of waiting, of putting your own timeline on hold, of accepting a level of commitment that doesn't meet your needs while hoping that eventually the avoidant will be ready for more. You're positioned as impatient or pushy for wanting normal relationship progression, while the avoidant faces no pressure to examine whether their discomfort with commitment is something they should address. The question ensures that the relationship moves only as fast as the avoidant is comfortable with, which often means it never moves forward at all, or it inches forward so slowly that you waste years of your life waiting for someone to be ready for something they may never be capable of providing. Why are you making this such a big deal? The question that minimizes your legitimate needs. This question appears when you try to address problems in the relationship, when you express that the avoidance patterns are causing serious issues, when you establish consequences for behavior that violates your needs. The avoidant responds not by taking your concerns seriously, but by suggesting that you're blowing things out of proportion, that you're being dramatic, or creating conflict where none exists, that you're making mountains out of molehills. This manipulation minimizes your experience, trivializes your concerns, and positions you as someone who creates problems, rather than someone identifying real issues that need addressing. The manipulation works because it makes you question the validity of your own concerns. Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe the issue isn't as serious as it feels to you. Maybe you're being too rigid or demanding by making this a deal breaker. You don't want to be someone who creates unnecessary conflict, who can't let things go, who makes everything into a major issue. So you downplay your concerns. You tell yourself it's not that bad. You convince yourself to let it go for the sake of keeping peace. This self-minimization is exactly what the avoidant wants, because it allows them to continue their patterns without facing accountability for their impact. But the manipulation lies in the avoidance framing of what constitutes a big deal. To them, it's not a big deal if they disappeared for a week without explanation. It's not a big deal if they're inconsistent in their availability. It's not a big deal if they refuse to discuss the relationship's future. It's not a big deal if they withdraw emotionally whenever you get too close. But to you, these patterns create insecurity, hurt, and an unsustainable relationship dynamic. The fact that something isn't a big deal to the avoidant doesn't mean it's not a big deal. It means the avoidant doesn't experience the receiving end of their own behavior, doesn't feel the impact their patterns create, doesn't understand what it's like to be in relationship with someone who can't show up consistently. The question also serves to shame you for having boundaries and standards. When you express that certain behaviors are unacceptable to you, the avoidance suggests you're being unreasonable by making it a big deal, by establishing consequences, by refusing to accept patterns that don't work for you. This shaming makes you feel like you should be more flexible, more accommodating, more willing to overlook behaviors that bother you. But having standards about how you're treated isn't making things a big deal. It's recognizing what you need to feel respected and valued in relationship and communicating that clearly. The manipulation deepens when the avoidant compares your concern to actually serious problems, implying that you're losing perspective. They might say things like, "It's not like I cheated on you," or at least, "I'm here, some people's partners actually leave," or "This is nothing compared to real problems." These comparisons are designed to make you feel grateful for the bare minimum, to make you think you're being ungrateful for focusing on problems when things could be worse. But the existence of worse problems doesn't make your problems invalid. Your relationship doesn't have to be the worst possible version of dysfunction for your concerns to be legitimate. The question also prevents resolution of issues by derailing the conversation before the real discussion can happen. Instead of talking about the avoidance pattern of withdrawal and what needs to change, you're now defending why this issue matters to you, justifying why you're bringing it up, explaining why it's a big deal. The avoidant has successfully shifted focus from solving the problem to debating whether the problem is significant enough to warrant discussion. And often, by the time you finish defending the validity of your concern, you're too exhausted to actually address the issue itself, which means the pattern continues unchanged. The big deal question ultimately serves to silence your legitimate concerns, to make you accept behavior that violates your needs, to ensure you don't establish boundaries or consequences that would require the avoidant to change their patterns. You're positioned as someone who creates conflict and drama, rather than as someone advocating for your own well-being. The avoidant faces no pressure to examine their behavior or its impact because they've successfully reframed the conversation as being about your tendency to overreact, rather than about their patterns that create legitimate problems. This manipulation ensures that nothing changes, because problems that aren't acknowledged can't be addressed, and concerns that are minimized as making a big deal out of nothing never receive the serious attention and response they require. The avoidant continues their patterns, while you continue accepting treatment that doesn't meet your needs, convinced that speaking up about it would mean you're being unreasonable, dramatic, or demanding, rather than recognizing that your concerns are valid, your needs are legitimate, and a partner who consistently minimizes your experience isn't someone who's capable of the partnership you deserve.